Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Asia Briefing Live. My name is Philipp Ivanov. I'm the CEO of Asia Society Australia. I'm joining you live from Asia Society HQ here in South Bank in Melbourne, from the land of Wurundjeri people of the East Kulin Nation. What a day it has been. I hope you enjoyed the forum so far as much as I have, and it's not over yet. It's my great honor to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Vivian Balakrishnan, Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Singapore. Dr. Balakrishnan has had a distinguished career in the Singaporean government since being elected a Member of Parliament in 2001. He previously served as Minister in charge of the Smart Nation Initiative, Minister for the Environment and Water Resources, Minister for Community Development, Youth and Sports, Second Minister for Trade and Industry, Minister in charge of Entrepreneurship, Second Minister for Information, Communications and the Arts, and Minister of State for National Development. Today, the Minister will share his thoughts on the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on Southeast Asia, priorities for recovery, but will also share Singapore's perspectives on geopolitical and economic trends and tensions. So he'll start with a brief address, after which he will be interviewed by Haslinda Amin, Chief International Correspondent for Southeast Asia at Bloomberg. A special vote of thanks will be delivered by our sponsor, BHP, and by Vandita Pant, Chief Commercial Officer of BHP based in Singapore. Now, Minister, it's great to welcome you back to Asia Society. Last time we met was in 2018 when we had the pleasure of hosting you at Asia Society in Sydney during the Australia-ASEAN Special Summit. It was a very different world back then. So thank you for joining us today, and over to you.
Thank you, Philip. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for this invitation to speak at this year's Asia Briefing Live. We're now into the second year of COVID-19. The virus is now endemic and will be a permanent presence in humanity. The emergence of new variants, in particular the Delta variant, which we know has greater infectivity, has caused huge waves of secondary infection everywhere, despite the unprecedented speed of vaccine development. And yet, vaccine access and vaccine hesitancy remain a challenge in significant parts of the world. Furthermore, we also see a sharpening of the geopolitical tensions, in particular the US-China tensions, and the emerging strategic rearrangements like AUKUS and the Quad. And Asia is really at the confluence of all these strategic fault lines. Today, I will focus my remarks on, first, the impact of the US-China relations on our region. Second, the exigent need to engage Southeast Asia on our own merits. And third, the role of Australia and Singapore. So let me begin with the most consequential bilateral relationship in the world, the US-China relationship. China's strategic and economic influence has grown, and today it demands to be treated as an equal. The US remains preeminent. It now sees China as a strategic peer competitor, something that is really quite unprecedented for the United States. And China sees itself as an alternative center of influence and source of prosperity. The strategic choices that both these countries make, including whether they can work together to uphold a stable and peaceful rules-based international order and meet the challenges of managing the global commons, will determine international peace and stability. Actually, the US and China are not inevitable enemies. Strategic competition between the two powers does not need to descend into conflict. The US and China are both aware of this. US President Joe Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping both alluded to this in their recent speeches to the UN General Assembly, which I just returned from a week ago. President Biden said that all major powers have a duty to carefully manage their relationships so that they do not tip from responsible competition into conflict. Similarly, President Xi emphasized the point that it should not be a zero-sum game. One does not need to achieve success at the expense of the other. I do not think that either side wants a collision. Both are painfully aware of the enormous consequences if a collision occurs, whether by design or, more likely, unwittingly by accident. We hope that both parties will work out a modus vivendi that will allow for cooperation in areas of mutual interest, even as competition remains in many other areas. We are in the midst of this strategic rebalancing, readjustment, and recalibration of the US-China relationship. And Southeast Asia, which has been at the crossroads of civilizations and trade routes for many centuries, is where the action will be for at least the next couple of decades. Southeast Asia wants to be engaged on our own merits, rather than to be seen purely through the lens of the US-China competition. We believe that an open and inclusive regional architecture is the best way for countries big and small to be able to prosper and to do so peacefully. We believe there are huge opportunities for our region, and our external partners, in fact, have significant equities right here, and we welcome them to remain engaged. Southeast Asia has 650 million people, a combined GDP of US $3 trillion, which, by the way, will more than double in the next 2 decades. ASEAN is projected to be the 4th largest single market by 2030, after the EU, US, and China. The US is the largest investor in Southeast Asia, with a larger stock of investment in the region than what it has cumulatively invested in China, India, Japan, and South Korea combined. China has been ASEAN's largest trading partner for the past 12 years. But what many people don't realize is that ASEAN has now become China's largest trading partner since 2020. Australia's trade with ASEAN countries is larger than Australia's trade with Japan and the US. There are therefore many areas for regional cooperation, and let me briefly touch on 3 of them: the COVID-19 recovery, the digital economy, and climate change. In the immediate term, countries are focused on recovery from COVID-19, and in particular, managing this transition from a COVID zero strategy to a COVID resilience strategy. And all of us need to work together on this recovery, helping each other with medical supplies and vaccines, sharing experiences, working together on R&D, as well as real-time information sharing. And in the longer term, we need to take forward the recommendations of the G20 high-level independent panel to address major gaps in pandemic preparedness, to strengthen the multilateral support for the WHO and the UN, and to mobilize resources for our collective security. Because this is a clear example where no one is safe until everyone is safe. Second, COVID-19 has in fact accelerated the digital revolution, with the digital economy a key new area of growth. Southeast Asia's digital economy is projected to grow 3-fold by 2025. But the digital divide is also widening around the world and within countries. Digitalization requires a concerted global response. There are many opportunities, in fact, for the digital economy cooperation. And the examples include the Digital Economy Agreement between Singapore and Australia, the Digital Economy Partnership between Singapore, New Zealand, and Chile, and the WTO Joint Statement Initiative on E-commerce that Singapore and Australia co-lead together with Japan. We need a global framework to maximize the opportunities and to deal with the challenges posed by the digital revolution. There are several paths that we can take. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres' proposal for a global digital compact is one. Another possibility is a new UN Convention on digital transformation for sustainable development, or a framework of norms and principles. And I look forward to a global architecture that is open, inclusive, and interoperable, and that will help us manage the digital commons in order to maximize opportunities and reduce the divide. Third, climate change is an existential threat that requires concerted global response. The August 2021 Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report found that without a drastic and rapid reduction in emissions, global temperatures are likely to rise above 1.5 degrees Celsius within the next 2 decades. And this will disproportionately impact developing countries and island states, including especially those of us in Southeast Asia. The fight against climate change will be a stark litmus test of our ability to manage the global commons through multilateral action. And cooperation between China and the US, the two largest global emitters, will be absolutely critical. At the same time, the digital economy presents many opportunities for our region to work with key partners in both the US and China in developing new and innovative solutions in areas including energy infrastructure and finance for green opportunities. So, where does Australia fit into this picture? We welcome Australia's continued constructive engagement of our region. The ASEAN-Australia-New Zealand Free Trade Area is one of the most comprehensive ASEAN Plus free trade agreements in force. Australia is already making significant efforts to engage our region in the 3 areas I mentioned earlier. Australia has made significant contributions to ASEAN's COVID-19 recovery efforts, such as through its Regional Vaccines Access and Health Security Initiative for the Pacific and Southeast Asia. And Australia has made vaccine donations to Southeast Asian countries as well. Australia is also working with Singapore in pursuing forward-looking and ambitious pathfinding initiatives. I mentioned the Digital Economy Agreement earlier. We are now discussing a Green Economy Agreement as well. And these could be pathfinders for regional agreements in both the digital economy and green economy. Australia's participation in our region helps keep our regional architecture open. Australia has always been a strong supporter of ASEAN centrality since becoming ASEAN's first dialogue partner way back in 1974. Australia is also part of several overlapping regional frameworks, including the East Asia Summit, the ASEAN Defence Ministers Meeting Plus, the RCEP, the CPTPP, and the almost 5-decade-old Five-Power Defence Arrangement. Even if you don't remember all this alphabet soup, the key point is that Australia has been an integral part of our region. Now, the newly announced AUKUS is something which we hope, and I speak now from the perspective of Singapore, we hope that AUKUS will contribute constructively to the peace and stability of our region and the world, and that it will complement the existing regional architecture that is open and inclusive with ASEAN at its center. So I would like to sum up with 3 key points. 1, in the strategic recalibration of the US-China relationship, constructive competition and cooperation between these 2 major superpowers is absolutely necessary and indeed possible. The converse outcome would be catastrophe for everyone. 2, Southeast Asia should be recognized and engaged for our own merits and not viewed merely as an arena for proxy major power rivalry. 3, COVID-19, the digital economy, and climate change are 3 areas where regional partners can cooperate with all of us in Southeast Asia in dealing with this challenge of the global commons. So I look forward to further discussions on these issues with you and a robust Q&A with Haslinda. Thank you all very much. Haslinda, over to you.
Dr. Balakrishnan, always good to have you with us and really good to see you again. I know you're a tad jet-lagged. Let's continue with our discussion. You've just returned from what appears to be a positive trip from the US. You talked about engaging Southeast Asia. What's your assessment of US engagement in Southeast Asia in light of AUKUS and the nuclear submarine technology that it's shared with Australia?
Well, I would look at this in two dimensions. First, there's no question that the US is trying to engage our region. In fact, I think in the last few months, Antony Blinken has engaged with us both virtually as well as in person 3 times with all the foreign ministers of Southeast Asia. So I don't, we're not lacking for attention. The question on AUKUS is actually a completely different dimension. And let me put it to you this way. If you look at AUKUS, what it really shows is that Australia has decided to tack far more closely to its historical, staunch ally, the United States. So, you can talk about the specifics of nuclear-powered submarines, or you can talk about their cooperation in cybersecurity technology and the rest of it. But really, those are details. The strategic point is that Australia has done its own calculations and decided it needs to tack far more closely with America at a strategic level. And in the case of Singapore, we have long-standing good relations with the United States, with Australia, and the UK. So on our part, we don't have any undue anxieties about this. These are 3 long-standing partners. We understand their strategic interests. We know this is not directed against us. And we will see how this evolves. And as I said in my remarks earlier, the key point is to make a constructive contribution to regional peace and stability and to complement the regional architecture in an open and inclusive way. So as long as these conditions are met, I think this will be positive.
The thing is, many countries were caught by surprise. And the Philippines now has come out to say that it may be rethinking its support for it. I mean, could it be a threat to regional peace? Some suggesting it might spark even a regional arms race.
I would not venture into that kind of speculation. As I said, take a step back and understand that at a strategic level, the big game is the US and China. And the United States, in its 260 years of independence and emerging from the post-Cold War unipolar moment, has never had a peer competitor on this scale and at this level of sophistication, and occurring at such a critical moment of both globalization and threats to the global commons. So this is uncharted, unprecedented territory. That's on the bilateral level. Now, if you look within Asia and you ask yourself, well, who are treaty allies of the United States? The answer, Japan, Korea, Australia. And within Southeast Asia, the 2 treaty allies actually are the Philippines and Thailand. I would stress that Singapore is not a formal ally of the United States. We are in a unique category called Major Security Cooperation Partners. Now, I think every country in Southeast Asia, what is it we want at a strategic level? We want peace and prosperity. For the last 5 to 7 decades, a multilateral rules-based world order based on open economies, free flow of investments and trade, and to a large extent envisioned and underwritten by the United States, has been a formula for peace and prosperity in our part of the world. But actually the biggest beneficiary of this world order, in fact, has been China. So things have come it's spiraled up into a new situation. So it's important to understand, therefore, that as far as Southeast Asia is concerned, we do not want to be forced to choose sides. We do not want to become an arena for proxy contests or even conflict. But depending on the issue, we will take positions. according to our own long-term national interests. So a certain amount of, I won't say divergence, but a certain amount of diversity in views is to be expected. I would not, again, be unduly anxious or worried about it.
But they are neighbors which are anxious. And frankly, I'm quite surprised that you say that Singapore doesn't consider itself an ally of the U.S. I've always thought that Singapore is a close ally of the U.S.
You can check. Yeah, we have no treaties that we've signed with the U.S. We only have a memorandum of understanding.
On the back of the AUKUS saga, Dr. Balakrishnan, there have been suggestions that perhaps the EU may bid to play a bigger role in the Indo-Pacific region. Your thoughts on that?
Well, first you should ask why the UK is part of AUKUS. And again, at a strategic level, I would say first, the UK has always been a very close ally of the United States and of Australia. Second, I think it also reflects a post-Brexit UK and also projecting its interests to this part of the world. And in fact, you know that the UK also has applied to be part of the CPTPP. The EU is also reminding everyone that it has interests in Southeast Asia and indeed in the Pacific Ocean itself. I think France regularly reminds us that they've got a lot of EEZ in the Pacific. So, you know, it depends on how you want to view this. I think the Pacific is where the action is going to be. And the fact that if this is where the action is going to be, major powers, and including powers of regional blocs like the EU, and the mid-sized powers will all have interests in our part of the world. And the challenge for us is to be realist, to read the situation as it is. And as I said, not to panic, not to overreact, but to understand what's going on, why these evolutions in architecture are going on, and then to avoid the pitfalls. And it can be done. And like I said, you know, I mean, I've expressed the hope that a modus vivendi will first be established between the US and China. And I'm making the argument for multilateralism and a rules-based system. And I'm making the argument for greater economic interdependence, the continued emphasis on cross-border flows, ideas, capital, investments, and trade. Because I strongly believe that this is a formula for peace and prosperity. But we'll see. I mean, events will unfold and we will see.
You've expressed hope, and I think everybody hopes that it's not a zero-sum game. At least the two sides, the U.S. and China, will not look at it that way. Are U.S.-China relations getting better or getting worse, you think? What's your assessment at this stage?
I think the tensions have escalated. I think the rhetoric has sharpened. But, you know, both at the very top, President Xi, President Joe Biden, these are experienced, seasoned statesmen. I do not believe that they are aiming for conflict. But there are certainly issues that they will have to work through, and we do need, you know, to give them some space and time to do so. And what we are saying from the point of view of Southeast Asia, and in fact from the Pacific, is to say, look, you know, in fact, confronted by a digital revolution and an existential threat of climate change and an acute challenge from COVID-19, there's so much more to be gained by working collectively, working together. And, you know, I really believe this does not have to be a zero-sum game.
We know that President Biden is reviewing his U.S. policy towards China. What needs rethinking? You talked about how, you know, there needs to be a realignment, rebalancing, readjusting. What would it take for both sides to come to some sort of a compromise and work together?
Well, you know, this is where you're asking me to venture into dangerous territory and to give advice.
Your thoughts?
You know,
I mean, a lot is at stake in the world.
Just bear in mind, Singapore is not even a mid-sized city in China or in the United States. All right. But obviously we have skin in the game. I guess one point which I would make is for the US to understand that whilst China certainly became part of the multilateral system, and particularly with its ascension to the WTO 20 years ago, and that this has been an avenue for an unprecedented historical achievement of lifting hundreds of millions of people out of abject poverty. But one caveat I would insert is that the US should not expect China to become more like the US. China has a deep historical sense of identity. It's a civilizational state. It has absolutely no intention of becoming more like the US, both culturally, politically, and even in its economic manifestations to the fullest sense of it. So that's one caution which I would include. From the Chinese perspective, China feels its time has come. It had a century plus of humiliation, primarily because it missed the Industrial Revolution. It's determined not to let that episode of history repeat itself. So it does demand to be treated as an equal. It does demand, if need be, for rules, processes, multilateral global institutions to reflect that new balance. And therefore, this is a period of adjustment, recalibration, and rebalancing, which the two superpowers will have to come to terms with, but the rest of us too. So as I said, watch this space. Again, understand, the key forces moving these tectonic plates. And then for the rest of us who are on those fault lines, be very, very careful.
Thank you for those remarks, Minister Dr. Balakrishnan. My name is Vandita Pant. I'm BHP's Chief Commercial Officer based here in Singapore, and it is really my pleasure to offer the vote of thanks today. To that end, Dr. Balakrishnan, thanks a lot for your highly engaging and insightful contribution, and thanks to Haslinda for wonderful moderation and questions, and to Philipp for the introductions. Dr. Balakrishnan, you covered what are arguably the three most salient themes of the day and maybe of the decade, which is the after recovery of the pandemic, the existential challenge of climate change, digital transformation, both a challenge, but what a huge opportunity, and all in the context of geopolitics, which can again be a risk, opportunity, and a factor for common good and common solutions across all these issues. Well, these are some really significant themes for any business or government. And I hope next time you somehow manage to negotiate slightly easier themes to tackle in your interviews. At BHP, we have certainly been grappling with all these as well. The pandemic has had a significant impact on the way we do business, but equally, I would say I highly commend the way the Singaporean government has worked for the past 18 months and continue to support business continuity. As we transition from pandemic to endemic world, we know the government, much like BHP, has health and safety as its guiding priority. And for that, we are really grateful. At BHP, we also look to support the local organization through the pandemic and targeting the most vulnerable in the society, along with our local partners, be it home, Aware, Missions for Seafarers, or Project Dignity organizations. But if pandemic offers a challenge here and now, as you mentioned, climate change is an existential challenge, and the one which we need to tackle collectively over the decade and more. And in that sense, I'm very pleased to say that pandemic did not sort of take us back away from our sustainability commitment. And I'm really heartened to see that the green recovery is in full speed. And everyone in the region, and Singapore is playing its part, thinks of this as a critical priority. In fact, during the pandemic, BHP out of Singapore signed 3 Scope 3 partnerships with customers in the region, contracted a fleet, the world's first LNG bulk carrier fleet, as well as became the founding member of Singapore's Global Maritime Decarbonization Center. And then, of course, the geopolitics, which is the context in which everything else happens, but hopefully climate action brings that common perspective across the different actors in the geopolitics arena to look for opportunities and do solutions together. It does present that opportunity to work together more effectively. That said, the challenges posed by geopolitics, which Dr. Balakrishnan, you have very candidly and very insightfully made sense of it in this region, the region which needs to be looked at in its own merit, is a critical issue and is not likely to disappear in near future and will continue to present the ongoing context for Asian nations as well as businesses. So thanks again, Dr. Balakrishnan, for so generously sharing your time and perspective today. And I'm sure I speak on behalf of the entire audience when I say that it was both enjoyable and enlightening, but maybe all too brief. So with that, I would also like to thank Asia Society and acknowledge the long-standing partnership between Asia Society of Australia and BHP, which goes way back to 1997. And with that, thank you, and I'll hand over back to Philipp, CEO of Asia Society, to officially close the session.
Well, thank you so much, Vandita, and thank you very much, Dr. Balakrishnan and Haslinda, for this session. Minister, thank you for sharing this very thoughtful remarks today, but also to Singaporean government and people for being such a good friend and partner for Australia, including now in these very difficult times. On that note, we're going to bring the 2021 Asia Briefing Live to a close. While the past 18 months of lockdown and travel bans have prevented us from gathering in person, the technology have allowed us to come together today internationally for our biggest, most international forum yet. We had 40 speakers joining us from Australia, Washington, Beijing, Paris, Ho Chi Minh City, Geneva, London, and Singapore. And for the second year, we have opened the main session of the forum to the public, and the response from all of you has been overwhelming. So today, over 700 listeners and viewers joined this event and participated in Asia Briefing Live. So no doubt there will be more watching the recordings of the sessions on YouTube. So my first thank you is to all of you, to our viewers and listeners. Thank you for joining us today, and you all reinforce and enable our mission as a bridge-building, inclusive organizations that welcome diverse opinions and perspectives in these very difficult times. I would also like to thank our host and partner, Bloomberg, and in particular, Ed Johnson and Rebecca Jones, and all their best and brightest colleagues from around Bloomberg News in Asia and around the world. This has grown into such a valuable partnership for us over the last 4 years. I'd like to also acknowledge our sponsors. First of all, the Victorian State Government is our foundation partner, and La Trobe Financial is a major partner of the Asia Briefing Live this year. Platinum partners, BHP, and thank you, Vandita, for your kind words and for your support of Asia Society. National Foundation for Australia-China Relations, and Rio Tinto. Without your support today, this event would not be possible. Thank you also to our executive partners, Minter Ellison and the University of Queensland. And I also want to extend thank you to our community partners, City of Melbourne, Committee for Melbourne, Melbourne Symphony Orchestra, the National Gallery of Victoria, and Queensland Art Gallery and the Gallery of Modern Art, who have helped us promote this program far and wide through their networks. And very importantly, thank you to all the members of Asia Society for backing us and for your ongoing support of our work and mission. And last but not least, to our team that led by Lena Duchesne, the manager of the forum, and Eloise Dolan, and the team in the studio as well. While today's program is over, if you are interested and passionate about the region, please join us, follow us, get involved with Asia Society, and continue this important conversation about our region. Thank you and good evening.